I really remember a couple of incidents clearly, even today, when I was 5 years old, that he did that messed me up for many, many, many years. This one time, my dad and mom had a really bad fight that the whole neighborhood could hear. That echoed throughout this very close knit neighborhood. It often escalated, my dad throwing and breaking things. His anger came out in violence. Two nights in particular, I remember, Dad went on a real tear and scared the shit out of us. One night, I vividly remember Mom and Dad fighting hard. I did not know why they were screaming at each other. I only knew it was especially intense that evening, and I feared this would be a lot worse than usual. At first, I thought I would just be running downstairs to referee a loud screaming match, but then ended up trying to wrestle a knife out of my dad's hands. He had taken a kitchen knife from the drawer and put it to his throat and screamed, "Fuck it, I'll kill myself then," in a very dramatic way. I found myself in uncharted waters, and it was either Timmy or Katie, or maybe both of them, along with my mother and I, who began to wrestle the knife out of his hands. We still witnessed him cutting his throat deeply enough to cause a lot of blood to bleed all over the kitchen floor. As we tried to prevent him from continuing his efforts, he knocked me to the floor as we all kept trying to disarm him from keeping him from doing any more damage. The sinking feeling in my heart from this was profound. At around 5 years old, I was trying to figure out why the man I loved so much, who had a huge part in raising us, handled anger and grief by acting out in this way. I think this was his way of sowing deep fear in us all. Another night, months later, Dad did about the same thing again, but this time taking a whole bottle of Valiums and chasing them down with a quart of whiskey as we tried in vain to intervene again without any effect. What I now know is that he used fear and intimidation as some type of method to control my mother. What I, until now, did not realize was that, to some degree, I tried to emulate him later in life when I was in my own unhealthy relationships. Considered today as a form of domestic abuse, those events, if repeated these days, would make many to this day grimace at such behavior. That behavior might even lead to police action with family court involving interactions with therapists, which may have been thrust upon us if this had happened now. The horror of those nights haunted me long into the future. Little did I know his actions would have a profound effect on me years later. The holiday always affected him the most for some reason. One time, he took the decorated Christmas tree and threw it out the front door into the slushy winter snow, proclaiming he hated Christmas. Another night, I remember, he took the Thanksgiving Day turkey and screamed, "There won't be a fucking Thanksgiving," and then proceeded to throw the bird out into the backyard into the fresh fallen snow. My mom defiantly went outside and took the turkey into the house and cleaned it up and served it to the rest of us while he stormed off upstairs to bed. Just another typical holiday at the Cronin house. I remember my dad one time getting into serious trouble at White Stadium, where he worked as an assistant athletic director in the Boston school system. One day during Special Olympics sporting event at White Stadium in July, he really got himself into a jam. That, in retrospect, I can look back and think to myself just how fucking crazy he really was. This one day, it was sweltering 94 degrees during a Special Olympics track meet at White Stadium. Because it was so hot, my dad instructed the kids to go sit under a shady oak tree where he had provided paper cups and a 5-gallon cooler that was loaded with ice for the young special athletes. Well, you will never guess who attended the stadium that day. It was His Eminence, Humberto Sosa Maderos, the Archbishop of Boston, representing the Catholic Church with all of its pomp and celebrity. The Archbishop, who I guess thought he was always in control, took it upon himself to walk over and tell the kids to move out from underneath the tree so the ambulance could now park there to get out of the hot sun. Dad saw the kids now leaving from underneath the shady tree and back into the hot sun, and as the ambulance moved under the comfort of the shady tree, he immediately approached the driver and asked him to move again as His Eminence listened just on a few feet away. The Archbishop foolishly approached my dad, scolding him loudly, saying, "Mind your business. Who do you think you are?" Oh boy, you would not believe what happened next. Dad screamed, "Fuck you, asshole!" and began punching the Archbishop, tackling him to the ground, all while his eminence was decked out wearing those full ceremonial robes, including that weird, strange hat that they wore, which made it look much more of a spectacle. Quietly, the police escort, who were supposed to be guarding His Eminence, all converged on my dad, which in actuality took all 4 officers to pry him off the now very shocked holy man. Dad got an unexpected invite in handcuffs down to Precinct 13, a police station near the stadium where he knew most of the officers. A few days later, they escorted him to the VA mental ward, and he stayed there for a month to treat his nutty behavior. I remember going to visit him at the VA hospital, and he gave me a wallet that he had made during arts and crafts therapy session. Boy, was he 3 sheets to the wind. They made him so stoned on something, probably Thorazine. Wow, this was surreal. Dad locked up because he was dangerous. Who would have figured, right? That summer, apparently, when Dad recovered enough, we started camping all over when I was about 4 years old. I remember camping down at Cape Cod, going to Vermont, New Hampshire, and all throughout Maine. Camping in the summer meant leaving the hustle and bustle of our beloved, congested city of Boston. I had so many childhood memories camping all over New England. One time camping down in Cape Cod, as Dad was fishing in the Cape Cod Canal, Timmy fell into the canal with very strong currents that swept him away. Michael, who had just become a lifeguard at the YMCA, jumped into the canal, swam after him despite almost overbearing currents, and rescued him from a probable drowning. Another time, I think around 1967, in New Hampshire, we went up camping up in the White Mountains near Pinkham's Notch. On this particular night, which happened to be my birthday, July 31st, we were camping celebrating my birthday, having cake and ice cream. Strangely enough, another family we noticed, with a much bigger group, were also having a birthday celebration just 2 campsites over. Their crowd was rather large as they surrounded a beautiful blazing campfire while they all sang happy birthday to the young boy who was around my age. It seemed to be getting late as I snuggled in my blanket on a cot with my family as we were just finishing our celebration. There was an older woman over at the other party who grabbed some charcoal lighter fluid and squirted it into the roaring fire, instantly making a loud boom as the lighter fluid hit the flame. What happened next, I'll never forget. As she continued squeezing the lighter fluid can into the fire, the flames vaulted 12 feet into the air. But as she released the squeezed can and the can began sucking the air back in, the flame, which were now high as hell, followed the vapor trail back up into the can, exploding it instantly. I heard the second boom that night, which scared the living shit out of me. The first was when the fuel hit. The second was even louder when the whole can exploded. The explosion of the can left the woman completely engulfed in fire. She immediately began running, and I watched her viciously screaming in what I imagined was extreme, unimaginable pain. As she ran around the campsite, now completely engulfed in fire, trails of flames fell from her, igniting the woods around the campsite. I'll never forget how she resembled a human torch after the explosion, which were followed by haunting, extreme, frantic screams, which have stayed with me all these years later. Considering I was only 8 years old when the event happened, it did not scare me that much at all. My dad's immediate reactions to seeing her running as a human torch were rather heroic, you know. He grabbed the blanket I had wrapped myself up in and charged toward the chaotic scene. As she was still both running around, now completely enveloped in fire, the scene of him tackling the burning woman to the ground probably seared the memory into my brains for life. After he tackled her, he began rolling her in the blanket, repeatedly rolling her over and over and over, extinguishing her flames. She had 3rd and 4th degree burns on almost 80% of her body. The full thickness of 3rd degree burns had spread throughout her body, extending to most of her upper torso and to all the layers of her face. So 4th degree burns additionally covered her neck, face, involving a deeper injury to tissues involving the face muscles, tendons, and even her eyes. Her hair and most of her clothes were completely burnt off, filling the air with a disgusting burnt stench I can still recall all these years later. The next morning was unnervingly silent until my brother Neil told me the woman died as he started playing a Beatles song called Eleanor Rigby, written by Paul McCartney. It was one of the most surreal moments that early morning, capsulizing the previous night's events as I reflected on the horror while now listening to the eeriness of the music and its equally disturbing lyrics. As I stared into the foggy meadows, now surrounded by the mist and fog obscuring half of the mountain we were camped up next to, the song Eleanor Rigby left a powerful image of the woman's horrible death and subsequent sad burial that the song's lyrics depicted, as I imagined it being the poor woman who was now dead.